Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Christensen, and
I'm Coffee Brown.
I'm Sean Soloway.
this is Don't Die Dumb.
Don't Die Dumb.
Yeah.
And our special first guest star, Sean Soloway.
Sean Soloway.
Don't die dumb.
Mm-hmm. You notice he aimed that at me. But anyhow, our topic today is toxic male masculinity. We touched on it a little bit on an earlier podcast. I wanted to start out by explaining that, especially in the Southwest, the Native American community was first plundered upon by the Spanish, who pushed this idea of male dominance on them. Across the rest of the nation, it was Catholic priests mostly that did it, but down here, it was mainly the Spanish population. After that, they were put in schools where this idea was pushed on. Today, because of poverty, and if you look around the world, now the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota is named one of the worst places to live on in the entire world. Whereas Mexico, I think, is number 2. The point being that because of that extreme poverty, recruiters hit them heavy, and they hit them all the time. It's a way to get out of poverty. But once they're in the service, and I've talked to many guys in the service and women, they get hit with Fox News on every monitor you can think of, 24/7. It's the only station they let them play. So they get out, and this whole idea of the male macho protector and defender, and more so dominator, is drilled into their system. I'm shocked how many of them vote against their own best interest. Your thoughts on this?
Say more about what you mean by voting against their own best interest.
It seems like voting for a MAGA candidate is something that's great for them. He's male, he's tough, he lays down the law, he's hard on crime, he's hard on illegals. But in actuality, when you look at the cuts that were made to American society, they weren't to slim down government. What they were was to take out social programs. 191 million from child cancer research, 429 million from Medicaid and Medicare, 82,000 veterans fired. There's a program right now, medical research. One of them, there's an endangered salamander. This salamander can regrow body parts. They feel they're on the verge of great discoveries here. All the funding's been cut. There's a program to deal with amyloid plaques, which finally doctors agree may be a major cause of Alzheimer's. All their funding's been cut. The Native American population votes for these MAGAs because they tell them what they think they want to hear. But in actuality, they're cutting out the social programs that help their families.
So, it's always been kind of a right-wing belief that the only legitimate roles of government are the application of force. This means police for law and order, and law and order means suppression of everybody who isn't like me, by the way. And it means military action. But a government that actually helps its people, they would argue, creates a sense of dependency and enables parasites. Because we all assume that people who are poor choose to be poor, and people who are disabled choose to be disabled, and people who are elderly chose to be elderly. If you just quit aging, being poor, or being disabled, you wouldn't need a social program, you parasite.
But you said law and order is a right way.
Well,
everyone wants law and order.
Everybody wants law and order, but there's a difference between rule of law and an appropriate and well-trained police force and having the army invade cities that voted against your party. That's like, those aren't even faintly related. There's nothing in common between those two things except guns. But what I meant to get at was that this notion that the only legit role of the American government is the application of force is factually wrong. If you read the preamble to the Constitution, it names 5 roles for the government. And they include promotion of science and invention, which is why we have a National Science Foundation. It's meant to answer one of the mandates in the Constitution. Also, to promote social welfare, which is where the word welfare comes from. There are a lot of legitimate debates to be had about what that should mean, but that welfare itself of the citizens is a role of the government is baked into the Constitution. You cannot say you believe in the Constitution, but you don't believe in welfare. You can say, I don't believe in it in the way liberals think of it, or Democrats, or whatever group you disagree with. But you can't say that welfare itself is not a role of the government. It actually is in the Constitution.
Sean, your thoughts on this?
I'm going to pass for now. I need to absorb a little of what's...
Sure. I should do more of that, quite frankly. Now, I think we've gotten off topic.
I do too, yeah.
Now, the idea of male masculinity, it's so pervasive. In South America, in some countries, it's still legal to beat your wife.
Right. I think we could differentiate between masculinity, which I'm kind of a fan of, and toxic masculinity, which I think is appalling. And one of the several aspects of masculinity that I would call toxic is that how do I know I'm winning unless I can make sure somebody else is losing? I do not think there need to be losers for there to be winners. So one aspect of toxic masculinity is the notion that everything in life is a zero-sum game, and for me to get mine, you must lose yours.
Well, I've been remiss in the fact that I didn't get you to explain your definition of toxic masculinity to begin with.
Given that it's your topic today, what do you mean when you say toxic masculinity?
It's when you take it to an extreme to where you're totally controlling. Is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's part of it. One of the notions is that men are good soldiers and women are not, or there's way more men in science, so men are better scientists. And by the way, I grew up believing that guys were better at math and spatial problems. That's actually what we were taught in school, and I believed it. It is true there's a lot more men than women in STEM, and it's true that even in places that encourage women into STEM, men are more likely to choose it than women are. But who cares? Even if I knew that men were 90% more likely to be good at STEM, Madame Curie was the first double Nobel Prize winner. And even if statistically men were better at math, and by the way, that is no longer what neuropsychologists think, but even if men were statistically better at math, if this particular woman is better at math than me, then she's better at math. What does it matter to me that across genders there might be a statistical difference? Why would I stop her from becoming a mathematician just because statistically people with boobs aren't as good as math? How does that make sense?
So explain to me, and I have my own opinion on this, why dictatorships are so popular right now and why male masculinity is the forefront of that.
So,
right now, Viktor Orban in Hungary, so many more around the world, and it's an alarming statistic. But go ahead.
Well, Trump went out of his way to invite Andrew Tate, who was wanted in several countries for sex crimes, including sex trafficking and of underage individuals. Do you want to jump in here?
I think you're being asked to prove a point that I'm not sure was your idea to prove that...
I'm asking why.
Well, I do think there's a relationship.
Yeah, okay.
You want to get voters onto your team while they're young. What you'd like is to get your 16-year-olds into your party so that when they're 30, they're still voting for your party. And young men hopped up on testosterone like the idea that they're all going to be Batman or King Arthur or something, right? So they have this picture of masculinity that focuses on applications of force rather than on something like mature responsibility. So whether or not you're pulling your weight at home, or whether or not you're providing well for your family as opposed to spending your money on gambling and drinking in bars and things, is less important to a young male than whether or not you can win a fight by the bike racks. But I don't think a nation that functions like an 11-year-old boy is going to do well in the international arena.
Well, I don't think young men want to be dominating things. I think they just want to belong to something. You don't identify with your family much anymore. They're your friends, but you want to be on your own. And they gravitate. That's why we have gangs. That's why you have biker gangs. Most bikers couldn't whip their way past a wet noodle. But together in a gang, they get pretty tough. That's why they always carry hammers. Hammer isn't a legal weapon. But if you carry it on you, you can use it.
Right. I think they do want to belong. And one of the easiest ways to belong, to feel like you belong, is to look around and say, what's a group that looks like me and feels like me and reinforces me? And a group that says, we're for young men and we're going to empower young men and so forth, can feel comforting to a young male. But these groups focus on the application of force as the definition of masculinity. Andrew Tate has explicitly said sometimes you need to slap your girlfriend around a little bit so she knows the rules. You got to teach them the rules. Well, that is a shallow form of masculinity that will backfire. And it ties into something I did want to talk about today, which is a culture that emphasizes female dependency. And that culture is both false and harmful. One of the reasons we promote the idea of this trad wife, all of the trad wife influencers you see on like YouTube and stuff are by definition not trad wives. They have a public face, they have their own identity and career independent of their husband, and they're making money as YouTube influencers. They might be baking bread and babies all day long, but they are far from trad wives because they have careers. They're career women.
Well, being a devil's advocate, let me ask you, if it's a woman's problem, why don't they do something about it?
I think it's cool to talk about masculinity in context of where it came from, the idea that we're battling with came from, and we tend to define things, especially for the masses like ourselves, in opposition, right, in binaries.
Yeah.
And so without femininity, there's no masculinity, right? And so we're trying to put everyone into black and white camps here. And what was the purpose being served for the, like, if we're talking about an idea of toxic masculinity in the West, right? This is American, this is the cowboy frontier, this is John Wayne, and he's got his little lady back in the cabin. Why did that have a purpose? Why did it ask to be created as a cultural norm?
Well, originally, if you look back at ancient pottery, all the gods were women, and usually women with limbs akimbo. And the reason was they needed more kids. Once they had enough kids to work the farms in agrarian societies, suddenly all the gods were men because they were protecting them from the tribe next door that would come and steal their crops. That's where
And their women.
now that's where it started, but that was a protector. It wasn't a dominator. Somehow they took it from protector to total control, in my opinion.
So I can imagine circumstances under which a woman without a man is in grave danger, a war zone, an environment in which there are ferocious wild animals around, things like that. But, you know, most of us, and sort of the point of civilization is to not live in such circumstances. I think the reason we still want to cultivate the idea of female dependence is twofold. One is that in these older cultures I'm talking about, a guy knows his job is to be the one who keeps other men away from his girl. Of course, we were never very good at that. In Steven Pinker's books, he cites that historically 70% of us died at each other's hands. So you might feel all great and warm and strong because you're a tough guy protecting your pioneer cabin, but if 5 tough guys come and decide to assault your wife, you're going to die. That's just how it is. I don't care who you are. You could be Sam Elliott, you're still going to die, right? The other thing is that if women are dependent on men, then a bad man is better than no man. But if women are not dependent on men, and more women than men have been going to college for 3 generations now, I mean, they're way outstripping us in college degrees and so forth, then to keep a good woman, you have to be a good man. And I think my idea of masculinity is that you step up to that. I always told my wife, you could definitely replace me. You're beautiful, you're charismatic, you got everything going for you. You could walk out that door and replace me in a heartbeat. It's my job to be the one you want, not the one you're stuck with. But apparently a lot of masculine guys are afraid of that challenge. And I don't think they should be. It's not that hard. If you treat people well and respectfully, they tend to want to stay with you.
Now, I told every woman I ever got into a long relationship with, look, I can't stop you if you want to cheat on me. So just tell me you want to do this other guy, I'll step aside and you'll be welcome home. And
What, can't you control your woman?
no, you can't. If someone's going to do that, they're going to do it, no matter if you want them to or not. And they cheated on me anyhow. And I thought, what the frick? I gave you the get out of jail free card. Does that make any sense to you? And is that female dependency?
It's interesting. We could talk about toxic femininity. So a lot of these incels and stuff, their picture of women is that they want a guy who's a Chad and who clearly has money. So he has to have like a rugged jawline, and he has to have outward manifestations of having a lot of money so they know he's a good provider. Well, the kind of guy who thinks that's what women want and optimizes for that kind of woman will only meet women who want that. He's going to meet gold diggers all day long, right? Mm-hmm. And in fairness, gold digger isn't really the right term because our society has trained the women who drink the Kool-Aid. We've trained them to say, your job is to stay home and bake babies and bread, and his job is to provide for you. Is that gold digging or is that cultural acquiescence? You know, it's kind of an insulting term to say gold digging. But if you think women are gold diggers and you optimize for gold diggers, that is all you're going to meet is gold diggers.
There's somebody at the door. No, I'm kidding. I lived in a rural community in northern Wisconsin, way up in the Northwoods. And I was talking to a woman in a metro area in Milwaukee. And she said, oh my God, up north, here's what happens. They meet in high school, after high school, they go out to the bars, they fall in love, she gets pregnant, pops out a couple of kids, all of a sudden he looks and she's fat. He starts playing around, the marriage is over. And I came to believe this. If you fall in love with someone you party with, it's probably the only thing you have common is drinking, smoking, and partying. That gets kind of old after a few years, you know. But the idea of dependency, I once told a woman, I said, she goes, what are you looking for? I said, well, relationships at work are often you do everything for her, and she wants to do those nice things for you. She goes, oh, so codependency, that's what you want. Am I wrong?
I've never been clear on what codependency means. What do you think about all this?
You can tell me, I'll understand.
You can depend on us. You can codepend on us.
Yes.
I'm more interested in thinking about the reason we were dividing ourselves into households from the earlier days. I mean, as we needed to populate the U.S.
Yeah.
after we decimated the local population and wanted to replace them, we would send out family units in groups, right? Basically recreate village structures and grow cities and populate the country as quickly as possible and be as productive as we could, getting the trains in place and creating an industrial movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with the recapture of the U.S. from the Brits, that was, as I understand, kind of based on interchangeable parts and rifles, and that gave us the upper hand. And
Yeah.
from there, we tore forward into industry. That was going to change everything, and it did. I mean, World War II was all about industry and proving who could make it work. Getting a little sidetracked, but I think within the context of having to put people into industrial jobs, which is really not a livable position, but was a necessity, we needed to have a physical body that was more or less disposable to power the machines at that time, and that body had itself to have a caretaker, and so, of course, the nuclear family structure existed before industry, but it was a really convenient model for the U.S. to over-embrace.
Yeah.
With our John Waynes heading out, go west, young man, and I think from there, industry really relied on the unpaid homekeeper, generally, the woman. and creating more industrial cogs in the form of babies. And I think what's interesting is that now that's played out. World War II came and went. We shipped most of them off to get slaughtered and, reaped the benefits with the next generation, our happy boomers who the victors came home and raised with all the resources gained from that war.
Guns and butter.
That's right. And we're now progressed to a point where we're not just post that war, but really post-industry, at least in this country. And I think the family unit is just starting to adjust to what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make a very good point. Why haven't we learned to outgrow that? But we're living in an exponential time when things move quite quick. Maybe that scares people.
Well, that's interesting what you said. Why haven't we learned to outgrow that? So there's this notion that if we return to older ways, we'll have the great stuff that we had in the past. We can return to the good old days when things were much better than now. We always remember things through rose-colored glasses. I always tell my students, when I compare you guys, you college students, with my generation of college students, you look terrible. And the reason is, I see you as you are, but I remember us through rose-colored glasses. The good old days never were. Those movies and books and things from that period are written by the people who were the winners, who liked what was going on. But it was always a small minority. Like, I love steampunk, and I love Victorian stories and Victorian movies. But when you look at people in their frock coats and their houses with pillars out front and their carriages, you realize you're looking at only a few percent of the population. Most of them lived horrible, horrible lives that we absolutely would not want to return to. But let's imagine the good old days really were good old days. They were still good old days in a different world. We live in a different world now. There was a time when we needed to crank out babies because half the children were going to die. Then came vaccinations, and we didn't lose half the children anymore. We will again now as we move away from vaccinations. So we're going back into a high child mortality period, predictably. And we needed people to run farms, and we needed people to fight wars, but we've automated a lot of that stuff now. Well, we need people to keep the jobs going and keep the economy going. We actually don't, for two reasons. One, between robots and AI, there's going to be a lot less jobs in the future than there are now. I'm aware of the argument that technology tends to create more jobs than it removes, but the fact that that was true yesterday doesn't mean that will be true tomorrow. It's quite clear we're going to lose more jobs than we're gaining with robots and AI. And so we don't need as many warm bodies to keep the machine running. Now in Japan, their population began dropping, and they were sort of alarmed by that. Oh my God, what does this mean for the economy? Turned out to be great in some ways, because if two old people die and leave one heir, that heir gets twice as much money. The fact is, the younger people were getting wealthier by doing nothing more than being the surviving generation as the older generation died off. You would reasonably say, well, an economy can't shrink forever, Coffee, and you're right. But what we haven't acknowledged in the past is that it also can't grow forever. There's a sweet spot, and we're going to be bouncing back and forth on either side of that sweet spot, or we're not going to be here in the next century. Okay?
Well, you're right. Nostalgia isn't what it used to be. But let me say this. In our final 7 minutes, let's talk about some possible solutions to this. The easiest one is education, but I think with education also comes reassurance. Yeah, this woman will get educated. Yeah, she'll get a good job. She might even be your boss, but that's not such a bad thing.
The very first job I ever got where I supported myself, during the job interview, they asked me, do you mind working for a woman boss? And I literally didn't understand the question. I said, is there something wrong with her? Like, what do I care whether my boss is a woman or a man? It's not me. I would like to someday be the boss, perhaps. A lot of people think they would like to someday be the boss. But that has nothing to do with whether my current boss is male or female. What I care about is, do they know what they're doing? Will they use my skill set and my time appropriately? That's all I care about. Like, whether or not they're male or female, I just don't care. So even if we think men in general make better bosses, let's take football. In general, men are going to be better football players than women. I think that's very likely to be true. But if a woman wants to try out for a football team, I don't know why I would stop her. Now, if that meant I have to build a whole new locker room for one female player, okay, you might have there could be a debate there. But broadly speaking, if a man wants to try out for something most men aren't good at, let's say ballet, or a woman wants to try out for something that generally women don't do, like be a pilot, fine, as long as you don't change the standards, you've already corrected for that. As long as the standards stay the same, and the standards are based on the needs of the job, then I don't really care whether those standards favor men or women. Let whoever wants to try out for it, and whoever can make the cut makes the cut. Why is that a challenge?
Once again, we get back to that. It threatens the insecure male personality. It threatens what they feel is their way of life. But remember, we want to point out some possible solutions here.
So the problem is, apparently, that some people are not confident in their own maleness.
Oh, yeah.
I don't need somebody else to tell me that I'm their idea of male. Very likely their idea of male includes some ingredients I don't want. Nor do they need me to tell them that they are my idea of male. Very likely my idea of male includes things they may not want. For example, my idea of a man is that he treats everybody respectfully unless they show they don't deserve respect. Apparently, a lot of men think showing respect to others weakens yourself. I don't feel that.
How do we get that point across to other men?
Don't be afraid. Just open your pants, look down there, and if you see a dick, you're a guy. Okay? You're done. Like, you're a male. Okay? Move on. Move on with your life and develop some competencies.
Thanks for bringing it down to my level. Okay?
That is the level we're talking. If people are afraid that they don't know their own gender, and whether that gender is binary and traditional or whether it's not, if you don't know your own gender, work through that. But you don't let other people tell you what symbols you need to be sure of what gender you are. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Very good. That wraps it up for us today. We're out of time. I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm Pete Christensen.
I'm Coffee Brown.
I'm this guy over here.
And remember, don't die dumb.
Don't die dumb. I keep forgetting my line there.
Don't live dumb.
Yeah, but it doesn't have the alliteration.